Hi, everybody. It's Ben Callahan, founder of Sparkbox, founder of The Question, and of Redwood's design system community. And I am really excited to be here with Jeremy Elder, who just finished co-hosting episode 62 with me. It's been a lot of Zoom calls and video calls today for both of us. So we decided to get together right after the call just so that it was fresh in our minds, the things that we learned in this episode. And so, Jeremy, welcome. Thanks for jumping in again with me today.
Absolutely. Anytime.
I just wanted to say a big thank you to our friends over at Zero Height for their gracious sponsorship of The Question episode 62 this week. Zero Height runs an event every year called Converge, and it's just in a week or two coming up in Bristol in the UK. And I'm going to be over there doing a full day workshop. A bunch of folks from Redwoods are coming. We're going to have an absolute blast in Bristol. I found out that there's a small stand of coastal redwood trees just outside the city. So we're organizing a little hike to go see these trees. The event looks incredible. The lineup is amazing. A bunch of folks that you know and love from the space are going to be there talking and sharing their perspectives. There's a fun lunch scheduled where some of the folks from Redwoods are going to coordinate awesome conversation. And I believe they're sold out for the main stage tickets, but there's a few left for my workshop, which is a full day event that's happening the next day. So check out the links in the FigJam file. That's all linked to in the description here. And you can get access to the discounts they're offering. And if you're not in the UK or in Europe and you don't want to try to make that trip, they are offering the ability to pre-register for the recordings. That way, get your name and email in. As soon as those are live, they'll let you know, and you can get access to all that great content anyway. So both of those offers are there in the FigJam for you. Thanks again, Zero Height, for your sponsorship. So the topic for this week was design system speed pressure. Jeremy and I actually co-hosted, it's been probably a year ago. Has it been that long? I don't know. It's been a while, dude.
It's been a while.
Yeah, episode 25 is what it was that we co-hosted together. And we talked about the idea of design system pace layers or shearing layers. It's a pretty well-known concept at this point in the space. And after our initial conversations, we kind of decided maybe we should try to take that a little bit deeper. And so we asked you all, is your design system team feeling the pressure to move faster? And then we also asked, how does this pressure or the lack of that pressure impact your design system communication strategy? And as you'll see when we get into this conversation, there's a lot of different ways that it is impacting communication strategy, and that communication is impacting the pressure as well. We sent this out to 989 design system practitioners. We got 53 responses. And if you're watching this video, I will make sure that the comments section or the description section has a link to the raw data file and the FigJam file that we created during the deep dive call. Jeremy, the first question was a yes or no. And I think it was kind of about what I expected to see, which is that over 75% of folks are like, heck yes, I'm feeling this pressure. Is that kind of what you were thinking too?
Yeah, that's definitely what I was thinking. Just based on industry topics, internal feeling, uh, what we talked about with the Redwoods Quarterly and people dealing with people, working with people. It was pretty evident that that was going to be a heavy majority there.
And it's funny, like the more I started thinking about it during the week as I was watching answers come in, the more I kind of recognized that the speed pressure is one of many facets of pressure that we experience. I do think in systems there's a growing disconnect in the expectations that executive leaders have for systems and systems teams and the expectations that design system practitioners have for those same programs. Is that something you experience at all? And like, how is that playing out in your role, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and something we covered a little bit at the end of the session was like, what did we initially promise from design systems? And it was this efficiency, speed was part of it, right? Like it's communicated, grab this thing off the shelf, plug it in, you're good to go. We have what you need so you don't have to spend the time building it. And so then we got investment from that leadership. And now, okay, we need new things built. Well, we're built for having things built and like this newness and like understanding like we don't have that off the shelf for you. Now we can go back to the factory and build it. That's going to take time. That's how I've seen it play out, where the same thing that we promised to get our foot in the door to get design systems funded is the same thing now that's coming back and being asked of us. So like, okay, you promised speed and you promised efficiency. Like, where is it? We need this. And so I feel like that's what I'm seeing a little bit of.
All right, let's unpack that a little bit because I remember this moment in the deep dive when we were talking about sort of the promises that we made, and now we have to meet those promises. I agree with all of that, but I don't think, at least in my experience, the promise that we made to get funding, and I know we're
Mhm.
speaking in sort of very general terms here, but the promise
Yep.
that many system teams make in order to get funded is not one that says the system itself will go fast. It's one that says building the system well means product teams can go faster. And so is this just a misconception? I mean, does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. And as we're talking about the different layers, we have the product teams kind of in the middle of that sandwich, and they can't go faster unless they have what they need. And so, from the top down, that perspective is that, hey, this team should be able to go faster because they have that. And then when that's not the case, we get that added pressure on us to deliver that. Product team still has the same pressure to deliver. They can't deliver it, so they have to look elsewhere or come up with another solution. So I think it's just it's evolving, and it's like somebody mentioned in the comments in that the goalpost is moved
Yeah.
essentially on what we're to deliver. Um, and yeah,
Yeah. Can you so I zoomed in here on sort of the image that you created for our last session and maybe have slightly modified a little bit here, but can you just sort of like describe this concept for anybody who's watching who isn't familiar with the concept of pace layers? Like what is that and how does it apply to systems?
okay, yeah. So pace layers is layers of work in this context that happen at different speeds. Design systems on the inner are they're for like remembering and cataloging things, curating, typically slower change. Where on the outsides of an organization, you have more experiments, product features, things that are adapting faster. They're learning what does the market want, what is helping users and consumers, and then that information ideally works its way back into those inner layers. Inner layers becomes curated and part of the system. And those things, though, they move at different speeds. And the effect of two layers coming together is a shearing effect where you can either have stress or you can build in elasticity to absorb those speeds and have it be a little more organic and not as rigid or fragile. So that's what this represents is just those layers and the different speeds and the different things that you might find at layers as you go out from the center.
Yeah. I love this concept. I think it does definitely apply. I think system teams have used it to sort of justify a slower pace, right? And we last time in our session together, episode 25, we kind of sketched this diagram out, which was like showing kind of mapping in a 4x4 grid or a 2x2 grid, this idea of speed on the y-axis and reuse versus invention on the x-axis. And we kind of said system teams tend to live in that bottom left, which is slow reuse, um,
Yeah.
and product teams tend to live in that top right, which is like fast invention. And then we have places like, slow invention where system teams are maybe creating new things, and places like fast reuse where product teams are adopting the system, right? There's a
Hmm.
bunch of things, assets they can use. And so this is a nice way to think about it, a nice sort of framing of the concepts too, that layers in the different layers of a system as well to kind of show that foundations maybe move slower than components.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about the no answers that we got. So,
Yeah.
we asked the question of, is your system feeling the pressure? And we had almost everybody say yes, but we had a few folks say no. Was there anything that stood out to you, Jeremy, from these answers? Like, what did you learn from the no's?
Yeah, really, I came at it initially with, yeah, everybody's feeling pressure. What are we going to do about this pressure? Like, pressure is the big problem. And in reading the nose, I realized that it's like, now, like, what we provide as resistance or whatnot is actually a good thing when done, with health, in healthy measures. But then the lack of pressure, this first comment here, lack of pressure makes it feel like we have low engagement for our output. That's a really interesting comment where it's showing like the need for pressure and which signifies engagement, which signifies like, hey, we trust you to do this, where we want you to do this, we want this from you. Those are all positive things. And often we just hear the urgency and those types of things, the bottleneck aspect, rather than feeling like we're needed and actually want what we have. So having this kind of an answer where it's like there's just no pressure was really interesting. Like we're not looking like a for like a flat line of like efficiency, because like flat lines are dead, right? There's nothing
Yeah.
dynamic happening.
Yeah.
We're actually looking for that balance and that resilience. So I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely this was a perspective shift for me, like, I definitely came into this with kind of, like, negative connotation around pressure,
Hmm.
but I think this answer and some of the others, even in the yeses, and in our conversation earlier, I think it just was really clear to me that we actually need it. We need some amount of this, and you sketched this really interesting diagram. I love the way your mind works, buddy. This is how I think too. So it was really fun to see you kind of process through the data. But you had this idea of lithostatic pressure, and I think this is getting at sort of that equilibrium that I heard you
Hmm.
just a moment ago describing. Can you explain this one a little bit?
Yeah. So it's like geological term, but a rock deep in the earth is going to feel a lot of pressure, the weight from layers above it. And with those static pressure, as far as I understand it, like I'm not a geologist, right? So like feel free to, throw out my definitions here. But with it, my understanding is that it's not just pressure from, it's not like single axis, but it's actually compounded by pressure all around it. As you're being forced down, you're putting pressure on other layers, which then you feel there's pressure from the sides. So there's just increased pressure all around. And the terms I chose here, pressure and speed versus resistance and sustainable, are, intentional to show like there actually has to be like a healthy resistance, a healthy pressure,
Yeah.
and healthy speed and healthy sustainability. And that they're not at odds, but they're actually balancing each other out. And that's why the arrow is not just like going inward, like, oh, we're feeling the pressure. But no, it's like we're providing uh, resistance in a meaningful way. And just like under, you put the piers in your house down to bedrock, we want to be that bedrock so that those other layers further up, they gain from that stability and that resistance, that firmness that we can provide. So yeah, it's just simple graphic just to show some of that balance and the multi-direction.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think that the challenges that we face come not the entire org when the entire org doesn't necessarily understand this concept of balance. When, an executive somewhere looks at how fast a product team is working and says, "We want the same from you," as a system
Hmm.
team. Instead of pausing to recognize it's a different kind of speed that we offer, and that speed in the big picture requires more intention at our layer. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot to do here around communication, around education with executives, and it's not easy to always get in the room with those folks. Um, but every moment, I think we have to sort of like every moment we have those opportunities, we need to kind of take them to like really be very intentional with our communication in terms of this
Hmm.
kind of language. So this graphic is really cool. I think there's a lot more to unpack here, and I'm looking forward to the article maybe that you'll write about it.
Did you see me taking notes? I just wrote down like the speed of stability. Like,
Yes,
yeah, it'd be kind of interesting. So
yes,
maybe in our next
that's right.
uh redwoods uh event or whatever,
Yeah,
the
the
working group
quarterly.
there. Yep, I can do that.
That'd be great. Okay, another diagram that you made, that I wanna just have you unpack, and then we can take a peek at some of the other parts of the conversation, was this idea of communication fidelity. I think you said you sort of saw this as a pattern in the answers. So tell me what you sort of discovered here.
Yeah, the what surprised me about the yeses was how much communication actually is happening. The our question was what does it change about your communication strategy, or how does it impact it? And several comments are like we're over communicating. We're communicating before things are released. We are, you know, trying to show transparently every little thing we're doing, to try to essentially prove like the value and like that we are moving and making progress. And at the same time, what is really coming down clear is there's still this urgency, this expectation, and this perception of bottleneck or slowness. And so it was really interesting to see that like I just called it communication fidelity, where from the top down, it's coming through with like perfect fidelity, that there's urgency, what the expectation is, what the perception is, and there's lossy communication that's like things are getting attenuated, like context of why things might take a certain period of time, nuance between like different decisions of I mean, there's not specific details, but my own, like, okay, if we adjust the border radius here, what is the impact on other layers and nesting and concentric and other components that feel like it? Like, there's all this nuance involved in it, and then communicating just the why. Like, why are we making these decisions? All of that from the inner layer out seems to attenuate, while the communication in and that pressure in doesn't do the same. It comes through, and in fact, because of the layering, it actually is amplified and it actually increases. And
Yeah.
so, as you know, maybe it's upper level, management on product teams, like that's one layer of pressure. Then it gets compounded and brought down, where trying to get information passed up the other direction, it just doesn't work the same way. The clarity doesn't come through at the top.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. What a challenging scenario that we're trying to operate in, you know? And, I mean, I think it sort of just in some ways, it makes it understandable why so many folks in systems are feeling burned out, feeling not heard, feeling frustrated in the work, you know? I mean, all of our communication is coming out from that lower level. It's always about the why. It's always about, like the nuance of our work. And it's so hard for that stuff to come through clearly, especially that's a game of telephone, passing it up layers, you know? So,
Yeah.
so this is really insightful to see it in this way.
And what's, part of the shortcoming of this is like as a practitioner, like I might be a visual designer on the team, I might be an engineer, but then I have to go and document my decisions for others. And so that takes time. That's part of that time aspect that's often what gets cut, is, what we saw in some of the feedback. And so as that gets cut, like our ability to communicate those things up even further is reduced, because we don't have that documentation to be a multiplier of our own thoughts. And so,
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
Yeah. Really good point. Um, okay. So there's a couple other things that I'd love for us to kind of get into here. I thought Cam had a really interesting point. You know, at one point they were talking a little bit about this idea that it's this pressure that we feel is challenging in some ways because it's really difficult to find an objective measure of speed. You
Mm.
know, speed is something that matters more in comparison to other things than it
Yeah.
does by itself. And so, it's a game of comparison in some ways. And, we kind of hinted at this maybe at the beginning when we talked about the promises that we've made as systems practitioners. And I do think it's a different level of speed. It's a different understanding of the idea of speed. It's an enabling as opposed to ourselves moving quickly. Um,
Hmm.
so I thought it was a really interesting, way to sort of like bring that concept to life. And Ron jumped in right afterwards and said, "Yeah, this is I love what Cam shared. Ron said it's about haste versus speed. You know, he was like, I think, pointing out the idea that just getting something into production quickly doesn't mean that over the long term that was a good choice. And
Right,
so
right.
real speed is more about like getting the right things into production well, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's really what systems enable. Does that align with your kind of thinking?
It does. I mean, how often, I don't know if you're a football fan, but do you watch team does something, executes really well, penalty brings it back, right? It doesn't
Mm,
matter how fast they scored, how fast they got in the end zone. It's like there's something else that it's going to bring it back, and I feel like that is what we run against. Like we're like, yeah, that's we threw the long ball. This is great, but then later we realize, like, look at all the steps that we didn't get right or execute correctly down the way, and now we're actually further behind. So yeah, I thought that framing of haste versus speed was really helpful because haste has more of that negative connotation that that's how we perceive the ask of speed
yes.
is haste.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think that's how it is asked, you know? Like, I mean, there's a concept of just compromise here, you know, that I think systems people tend to shy away from the idea of compromise, and product teams that are closer to the business needs are very used to having to make compromises, you know? And so they're having to make those compromises, and so they ask for the same from us. And I don't know what the right tension is there. I mean, it's probably a balance of some kind, but I think it is harder for us as systems people to look at the purview that we have, right? To build a solid foundation and say it's okay to make a compromise. That just doesn't feel like it goes with the job, right? So
Yeah.
in some sense, it reminds me of what Jeff shared, which was this idea of like the cultural side of this, which is that certain orgs, they just there's an expectation on the way you sort of approach decision making and compromise and how those things sort of come together to build our culture.
Hmm.
And he shared a slide from one of Nathan Curtis's decks around, you know, like this idea of like what's the need? Is it a need now or is it a long-term need? I think he was really that to me feels like it's getting at the haste versus speed thing in some ways, you know. So really cool to see other folks in the space thinking this way. Any thoughts on this, or
I have a rabbit trail, like, but if you have a continuation, go
let's do
ahead.
it. No, 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 let's hear
Rabbit
it.
trail. Something that we had talked about uh, prior to the hosting the episode was micro adoption, and
Yeah.
we never quite got there in the session, or it never really came up. But when you talk about making concessions, I feel like we don't have those paths of micro adoption where the concessions or the fallbacks are still acceptable,
Yeah.
and being able to build smaller units of adoption or things to use so that, okay, maybe you can't use this component because of this circumstance. It's not written the way you need it, doesn't have these features. But guess what? You can use as a concession. That's great. You can build this layer, but you can use these things. That'll get you, 40% of the way there, 50, maybe 60, whatever it might be. We haven't built that layer of concessions in yet where we feel comfortable doing that. So
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love the idea of like a sort of like a fault tolerant approach where it's like if you don't have the right pattern, look for the components to build the pattern. If you don't have the right components, look to the right, you know, tokens or whatever to build the
yeah.
components, you know, and providing it in some sense, then it's about as much about education, right? It's about teaching product teams how to build systematically so that they can build following the sort of ideals of the system and
Hmm.
the architecture of the system. That's
Yeah.
great.
It's
Love
like a
that
good, better,
concept.
best approach, right?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
My goodness, so many other things. You know, you can. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I've got a link you can see in the notes for this video to get access to this FigJam file, where you can kind of go and see what folks shared. There's lots of really good input here. It was a very interesting conversation, and I wish we had another hour because I feel like we could have continued diving in. I'd love to just sort of close up on this diagram that you shared on phase coupling and harmony as like a potential sort of alternative to layers in terms of our thinking. Can you kind of explain this one?
Yeah. So layers are interesting because they kind of demonstrate like a compounding effect, and like, oh, we're on the inner and they're on the outer, so it automatically creates this adversity where it's thinking, what would it look like to not have that? And I started thinking in more musical terms and harmony and dissonance. And again, just like the geological stuff, like I am no audio engineer. I, I'm like a guitar hobbyist, right? So bear with me, but it's this thought of like, how can we, through the same span of time, create alignment and expectations? So the thought of like harmony or phase coupling, where it's like you are in this phase, you are doing certain things that align with how other teams are doing them. And in this example, it's just like a perfect octave, like a 2 to 1. So, for example, every system cycle has two product cycles. So you're moving slower. You have lower amplitude, but there's this same outcome and this aligned sync points that are always predictable. And the amplitudes there, like feature launches, experience products have these higher amplitudes. Lower amplitudes are for incremental improvements, and they work together and balance each other out. And that just in uh, the caption there, the way that balances it out is like a system team might speed up to support a major product release.
Yeah.
And then there might be another phase where things slow down, and then the product teams slow down to integrate a system overhaul. And in that, you're working together, and there is more harmony and more alignment on how things are happening, rather than this dissonance of like, when are you going to have this built for AI? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't even know how we're using AI ourselves yet. Like, that's a good
Yeah.
question. So,
Yeah. Love this. And I am actually an audio engineer.
ah,
And when I look at this, there's two other things that come to mind. So one is the idea of phase cancellation, right? So if you have in-ears that do sound like blocking, the way that
mhm,
works is they actually have microphones that record the sounds coming in, and they reverse the polarity, they reverse the phase of that sound, which actually causes a cancellation. And so I would want to think this through in terms of like, what can we do? What efforts would we maybe put in place at the wrong times that would
mhm,
undo work from product teams, right? So we got to be thinking about that.
yeah,
And the other one is the concept of resonance, which is like if I'm in a room, right? If the mathematical distance between these waves aligns perfectly with the distance lands at the beginning and the end of the walls in that room. Maybe you've noticed this in a stairwell. There's like a certain tone that's a resonant frequency for that space.
mhm,
And so then I'm like, okay, that's when sort of two things work together and it creates more and more movement, more energy. And that's the swinging effect. If you're on a swing, if you kick your legs at just the right time, you can keep going higher and higher by only extending the same amount of energy, right? So that's what I would hope to see here, right? Is like, how do we find the resonant frequency with our other teams? And that would, I think, create some incredible momentum for our work. So
sounds like an article for you now.
we're giving each other homework. I
Yeah,
love it. Maybe we'll co-author both. That would be fun.
yeah. Well, I'd love to learn more about you know carrying forward some of these concepts, because
Yeah.
I think it's pretty interesting.
Very much so. Jeremy, we're at the end of our time, but dude, this was so fun. And I think there's so much more to unpack here. So I think we need to talk about future episodes or future digging in some capacity. Thank you so much for making time to do this. I just want to also say a quick thank you to Zero Height, who is running Converge in just a couple weeks. They sponsored the episode. It's so much work to put these things together, but it's really cool when an org kind of gets behind that. But Converge is going to be amazing. And if you can't make it over to the UK, you can pre-register for the recordings. So that would be a great way to get those talks. There's an amazing lineup of folks that are going to be presenting. Those talks could be, they'll let you know right when they're live. So I think that's all we got. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah,
Appreciate you, my man.
yeah. Likewise, thank you.
Yep. Cheers.